My Weirder School, Book Number 8. Dr. Nicholas is Ridiculous. Written by Dan Gutman. Pictures by Jim Pelot. Chapter 4. The Good Old Days. Dr. Nicholas came out on the stage. She looked really old. She had white hair tied up in a bun in the back, and she walked with a cane, really slowly. I've seen glaciers move faster than Dr. Nicholas. I could have run around the block in the time it took her to get to the middle of the stage. "Wow, that lady is old," whispered Ryan. "She's even older than Mr. Docker," I whispered. "Mr. Docker is our science teacher. I thought he was old, but Dr. Nicholas looked old enough to be Mr. Docker's mother. She must know a lot about history because she's about 1,100,000 years old," whispered Neil the Nude Kid. "Yeah, she probably lived through most of it," whispered Alexia. Mr. Klutz told us to give Dr. Nicholas a round of applause, so we clapped our hands in circles. "Does anybody have any questions they would like to ask Dr. Nicholas?" asked Mr. Klutz. "Yeah, how old are you?" I asked. "That's not a nice question to ask a person, AJ," said Mr. Klutz. "I don't mind," said Dr. Nicholas. "I'm 92 years old and proud of it. How old are you, young man?" "I'm 8 years old," I said. "8?" said Dr. Nicholas. "When I was your age, I was 9. Everybody laughed, even though she didn't say anything funny. "Did you ever meet Abraham Lincoln?" asked Alexia. "No," said Dr. Nicholas. "But years ago I drove one of his convertibles." "Were you alive when there were dinosaurs?" asked Michael. "Oh, yes," said Dr. Nicholas. "In fact, I used to ride a dinosaur to school." I'm pretty sure that Dr. Nicholas was yanking our chain. Everybody knows there were no schools in dinosaur times. Besides, it would be hard to ride a dinosaur. They don't even make saddles for them. Dr. Nicholas would have had to ride the dinosaur bareback. But maybe she was telling the truth, because old people don't usually make jokes. That's the first rule of being old. Ryan stood up to ask a question. "My dad told me that when he was a kid, they didn't have video games or microwave ovens or fruit roll-ups," Ryan said. "What was it like when you were a kid?" "Ah, the good old days," said Dr. Nicholas. "When I was your age, we didn't even have TV." "What?" everybody gasped. "No TV? I would die without TV. The only good thing about having no TV is that they couldn't have TV turn-off week." The good old days sounded like the bad old days to me. If I lived back then, I would have sat around all day saying, "I wish somebody would hurry up and invent TV already, because I'm bored." "What did you stare at all day?" asked Neil the Nude Kid. "What did you do for fun?" "We went out to play," replied Dr. Nicholas. "What?" There was a buzz in the all-purpose room. Everybody was talking to each other. You mean in the outdoors? Asked Andrea. Yes. Everybody gasped again. Didn't you get sunburned? Asked Andrea. Didn't your clothes get dirty? Asked Emily. What about the bugs? Asked Michael. Wasn't it dangerous? Asked Alexia. Weren't you afraid of getting hit by a car? Asked Neil the nude kid. No, she was afraid of getting hit by a dinosaur, I told Neil. Oh, it was a wonderful time, said Dr. Nicholas. My friends and I used to play hopscotch, marbles, or hide and go seek. My favorite thing to do was jump rope. Did you ever jump rope? Oh yeah, said Ryan. My sister has an app called Jump Rope Simulator on her iPad. It's awesome. Dr. Nicholas, were you on your school jump rope team? Asked Andrea. Oh, we didn't have a team, said Dr. Nicholas. We just jumped rope for the fun of it, out in the street. You played in the street? We all shouted. Now I knew she was yanking our chain. You would have to be crazy to play in the street. I bet she made up all that stuff about riding dinosaurs and Abraham Lincoln's convertible. My friends and I would jump rope anywhere, Dr. Nicholas told us. In fact, I feel like jumping rope right now. That's when the weirdest thing in the history of the world happened. Dr. Nicholas pulled a rope out of her pocket. Then she swung it over her head and started jumping over it. Dr. Nicholas is ridiculous. Chapter 5, our first history lesson. After lunch, Dr. Nicholas came into our classroom. Clear off your desks, said Mr. Granite. It's time for our first history lesson with Dr. Nicholas. Yay! Shouted all the girls. Boo! Shouted all the boys. I hate history. History is dumb. Why do we have to learn about stuff that already happened? Who cares about a bunch of dead dudes who died 1,100 years ago? Mr. Granite said he would be back in half an hour. He went to the teacher's lounge, which is a secret room near the front office, where no kids are allowed. My friend Billy, who lives around the corner, told me the teachers go to the teacher's lounge to relax in a big hot tub while servants in bathing suits feed them grapes. Dr. Nicholas picked up a marker and wrote, "History is fun," on the whiteboard. Today, she said, we're going to learn about the history of the toilet bowl. What? Toilet bowls have a history? Asked Ryan. Of course, said Dr. Nicholas. Everything has a history. Toilet bowls are disgusting, said Emily, wrinkling up her nose. I thought history was all about words, said Andrea, and the great men and women who changed the world. History is about everything that came before us and made the world what it is today, said Dr. Nicholas, and that includes toilet bowls. Did you ever hear the story of Tom Crapper? Everybody laughed because Dr. Nicholas said the word crapper. My mom told me that's a bad word that I should never say to anybody. Wait a minute, Neil said, jumping out of his seat. Are you going to tell us that the guy who invented the toilet bowl was named Crapper? No, said Dr. Nicholas. Simple toilet bowls have been around for many centuries. The first toilet you could flush was invented back in 1596 by a man named John Harrington. So the toilet bowl was invented by a guy named John. That made sense. What did Tom Crapper do then? Asked Michael. Everybody laughed because Michael said the word crapper again. It's impossible to say the word crapper without laughing. That's the first rule of being a kid. Tom Crapper was born in 1836 in England, Dr. Nicholas told us. His father was a steamboat captain. When Tom was 14, he went to work for a plumber in London. By the time he was 25, he owned his own plumbing shop. Back in those days, people didn't even talk about toilets, and only very rich people owned one. What did everybody else use? Asked Ryan. Often they used a hole in the ground, said Dr. Nicholas. Gross! Everybody shouted. During the 1880s, Tom Crapper improved on the flushing toilet bowl, said Dr. Nicholas. He also opened up a shop and sold toilet bowls to the public. For the first time, regular people could go to the store and buy a toilet bowl, and the rest is indoor plumbing history. Wow, we all said, which is Mom upside down. Today, of course, we all have toilet bowls in our own homes, said Dr. Nicholas, and we owe it all to Tom Crapper. I jumped up from my seat. Hooray for Tom Crapper! I shouted. Crapper, Crapper, Crapper! I figured everybody was going to jump up from their seats and start chanting Crapper with me. I looked around. Nobody else was standing. Nobody else was chanting. Everybody was looking at me. I hate when that happens. I sat back down in my seat. I still say toilet bowls are disgusting, said Emily. You know what's even more disgusting than toilet bowls? Asked Dr. Nicholas. What? We all asked. No toilet bowls, she said. Imagine how the world would be different if we didn't have toilet bowls. We would probably still be using a hole in the ground, said Neil the nude kid. Dr. Nicholas told us lots more cool stuff about the history of toilet bowls. The girls were grossed out, but the boys all thought it was hilarious. Just about anything to do with toilet bowls is hilarious. That's when the door opened. Mr. Granite came back in. I couldn't believe a half hour had gone by so fast. I guess our history lesson is over, said Dr. Nicholas. Yay! Shouted all the girls. Boo! Shouted all the boys. We want to learn more about the history of toilet bowls, said Ryan. Yeah, toilet bowls are cool, said Michael. Who invented toilet paper, Dr. Nicholas? Asked Neil the nude kid. We can discuss that another time, she said as she left the room. Mr. Granite told us to open our math books, but I couldn't stop thinking about Tom Crapper and his toilet bowl. That's when I came up with the funniest joke in the history of the world. Do you know what Tom Crapper used to draw his first toilet bowl? A number 2 pencil. Get it? No wonder I'm in the gifted and talented program. I should get the Nobel Prize for that one. Chapter 6. Our second history lesson. My name is AJ and I love history. History is cool. I had no idea that you could learn about the history of the toilet bowl and stuff. The next day, right after we finished pledging the allegiance, Dr. Nicholas came into our classroom again. It's time for another history lesson, said Mr. Granite. Yay! Shouted all the boys. Boo! Shouted all the girls. Mr. Granite went to the teacher's lounge and said he'd be back in half an hour. What are we going to learn about today? I asked Dr. Nicholas. The history of the urinal? Can we learn about the history of snot? Asked Michael. I've always wondered where it came from. It comes from your nose, dumbhead, said Neil the Nude Kid. Oh, snap, said Ryan. Will you teach us about the history of farting? I asked. I bet that's really interesting. We also suggested that Dr. Nicholas teach us about the history of burping, maggots, snakes, and barf. You boys are gross, said Andrea. I don't think I like history anymore. Me neither, said Emily, who always agrees with everything Andrea says. That's too bad, said Dr. Nicholas, because today we're going to learn about the history of Barbie. What? Barbie? I didn't want to learn about the history of Barbie. Barbie is for girls. I love Barbie, Andrea shouted, all excited. Me too, said Emily. Barbie has a history? Oh, yes, said Emily. Everything has a history. It all started in a California garage back in the 1940s. Me and the guys covered our ears and made humming noises so we wouldn't have to hear about the history of Barbie. But it didn't work. I still heard every word. Back in those days, Ruth and Elliot Handler owned a company called Mattel that made picture frames, said Dr. Nicholas. Isn't Mattel a toy company? Asked Alexia. It wasn't back then, said Dr. Nicholas, but they used the extra scraps of wood to make doll furniture. Soon, they discovered that they were making more money from the doll furniture than the picture frames, so they switched to making toys. That's interesting, said Andrea. Tell us more, said Emily. I thought I was gonna die. Back then, Dr. Nicholas went on, most dolls were baby dolls, but Ruth and Elliot Handler went on a trip to Switzerland, and one day they saw an adult doll called Lily in a store. They brought one home for their daughter, and do you know what their daughter's nickname was? Dumbhead Ugly Face, I guessed. You are so immature, Arlo, said Andrea. I bet their daughter's nickname was Barbie. That's right, said Dr. Nicholas. So in 1959, Ruth and Elliot decided to make the first Barbie doll. It was 11.5 inches tall, and it sold for $3. It became the most popular doll in the world. 2 years later, they came out with Barbie's boyfriend, Ken, and he was named after their son. Dr. Nicholas went on and on talking about the history of Barbie. I thought the half an hour would never end. I kept looking at the clock and waiting for Mr. Granite to come back from the teacher's lounge. "Are Ruth and Elliot Handler still alive?" asked Andrea. "No," said Dr. Nicholas. "Ruth passed away in 2002 and Elliot died in 2011. But Barbie lives on. Mattel has sold more than 1 billion Barbie dolls, and every 3 seconds another one is sold." "History is interesting," said little Miss Perfect. "I hate history." "Oh, I almost forgot," Dr. Nicholas said. After a few years, Elliot decided that he wanted a toy for boys, so he came up with the idea of real-looking little metal cars. And in 1968, Hot Wheels was born. What? The same people who invented Barbie also invented Hot Wheels? "Tell us about the history of Hot Wheels," said Ryan. "Yeah," shouted all the boys. "Well, it all started back in—" Dr. Nicholas didn't get the chance to finish her sentence because Mr. Granite came back from the teacher's lounge. "I'm afraid we're out of time," Dr. Nicholas said. "We'll learn more about history tomorrow." "Yay!" everybody shouted. "I'm really glad we're learning all about history," said Andrea. "But we need to prepare for the big test." "Yeah, if we don't do better on the test next week, the school will be closed," said Alexia. "Don't worry about that silly test," said Dr. Nicholas. "It will be a piece of cake." "More cake?" Maybe they were going to give us a test with all the questions written in the icing of a cake. At Ryan's birthday party last year, there was a cake with a photo of Ryan's face on it. I got to eat Ryan's eyeball. It was cool. All that talk about cake was getting me hungry. That was good, because it was time for lunch.